For more than 40 years, Sir Jimmy Savile was a show business friend of the establishment, a friend of the rich and famous, even of prime ministers and royalty. He was celebrated for his charity work and famed for his TV programmes, most of them featuring children. But tonight, Exposure investigates allegations that away from the cameras, Sir Jimmy Savile was far from a genial eccentric. He stands accused of being a sexual predator, charged with at times preying on the very teenagers he invited to appear on his BBC TV shows.
Jim didn't do kissing, he didn't do emotion or foreplay or anything. It was just basically what he wanted in and out, and that was it.
He hadn't restrained himself just to my breast. He'd also had a good fumble around in my knickers.
Looking back, I think, oh my God, he actually raped me.
Now, for the first time, we explore the other side of Jimmy Savile. These were the scenes at Sir Jimmy Savile's funeral following his death last year. The streets of Leeds were packed with mourners who wanted to pay their respects to a national institution. The gold-coloured coffin was typical of the showman and entertainer who during his life helped raise an estimated £40 million for good causes. But we've discovered evidence of another Jimmy Savile, a man who mourners at his funeral would find almost impossible to recognise. While Savile was still alive, he was surrounded by gossip about his private life. In a BBC documentary with filmmaker Louis Theroux in 2000, he was asked specifically about speculation that he was a paedophile.
So why do you say in interviews that you hate children when I've seen you with kids and you clearly enjoy their company and you have a good rapport with them?
Right. Obviously I don't hate them. That's number one.
So why would you say that then?
Because we live in a very funny world. And it's easy for me as a single man to say, I don't like children, because that puts a lot of salacious tabloid people off the hunt.
Are you basically saying that so tabloids don't, pursue this whole isn't he a paedophile line, basically?
Yes. All right. How do they know whether I am or not? How does anybody know whether I am? Nobody knows whether I am or not. I know I'm not.
But was there more to that denial than meets the eye?
Ho, ho, ho.
It seems Savile's death has been a trigger for some of those who feared him during his life to finally find the courage to speak out. I'm Mark Williams-Thomas. I'm a child protection specialist. But for 12 years I served with Surrey Police. I started the investigation into music mogul Jonathan King. Back in 2001 he was jailed for 7 years for sexual offences committed against underage boys. Now, for almost a year, I've been investigating Savile. Back in 1978 he was at the height of his fame. He was also a regular presenter on Top of the Pops. And he was pulling in 15 million viewers on a Saturday night with Jim Will Fix It. In Leeds, he also had his own regional show, Jimmy Savile's Yorkshire Speakeasy. Each week, guests were invited into the studio to discuss a different subject. Sue Thompson was a newsroom assistant in BBC Leeds at the time. One day Sue, then aged 23, says she was asked if she could help out on the Speakeasy show. On this occasion, the invited studio audience included children.
I stayed behind to help, and I also set up the dressing room for Savile during the day. He wanted dandelion and burdock and cigars that he wanted, specific cigars, which I had to go into Leeds to get. And I believe there was a bunch of flowers in there as well. It was just a small dressing room which we set up. I went back down to the dressing room because I wanted to make sure it was either empty or whether it needed tidying up. And I recall it was a very short walk from the bar to the actual room, and I walked in. Didn't expect, actually, didn't really know whether anybody was going to be in there or what I would see. And I opened the door and I walked in, and Savile was sat in the chair with the right side of his body facing me. And there was a girl of about 14 with long brown hair, sat on his knee. He had his left arm up a skirt, and he was kissing her, but what I distinctly remember, and that's the image that sticks in my mind, was the fact, as I opened the door, he turned his head, and it was just his tongue that was just sort of coming out of her mouth that stuck in my mind. It was that image, so it wasn't just like a peck on the cheek that she jumped on his knee and sort of done it spontaneously. It was a definite sexual advance to this girl. And at the time, and thinking about it since, I think there was a certain element of shock as to actually whether I'd actually seen what I saw. He made no particular reaction. He didn't jump up or try and stop me leaving the room or anything. And I was a bit disorientated afterwards. I remember closing the door, and then I went to find my colleague and told him what had happened, and he sort of laughed about it, really, and nothing else was really said.
You were in no doubt of what you saw?
Absolutely not. I've no doubt at all what I saw. And in actual fact, I can still see the girl's face and what she was wearing at the time.
Just hours later, Sue says she and the rest of the team headed to the cinema for a night out. Savile, who was 51 at the time, was due to visit Leeds General Infirmary that night. But first he too went to the cinema. He made a point of sitting next to Sue. Did you read anything into the fact that he came and sat next to you in the cinema?
I think he was checking me out, because he didn't stay long. I mean, why actually come to the cinema and only spend, say, maybe 10-15 minutes there, and then leave, make a big play about, oh, I've got to go now, I'm going to work as a porter at the LGI. Why make that point? Why didn't he just go straight to the LGI or just go straight home? There was almost like he came to the cinema for a reason, which was to just check me out, I think.
Sue left the BBC a year later, but she says the incident she witnessed over 30 years ago has stayed with her. How difficult a decision is it for you to speak out about what you saw?
I would have said something before if I'd have had the courage or the conviction that perhaps something would have done about it. But it has been difficult to speak about it, just because of who Jimmy Savile was. I don't think I ever saw him have any bad publicity, and I think that's the overriding thing. Everybody saw him as Sir Jimmy, the great charity worker, etc. And it's like you're saying, oh no, he's not. This is what I saw. And it's a case of you just one person in millions standing up and saying, actually, no. But it's that fear of people probably not believing you.
We believe tapes of the Speakeasy programme from 1978 no longer exist. We haven't been able to access programme records and so have no way of identifying the girl. But Sue believes that the girl was around 14 and that she was sexually assaulted. My investigation would lead me to other people with similar stories to tell. I'm former detective Mark Williams-Thomas, and I'm investigating the other side of Jimmy Savile. One former BBC employee has already told me that she saw him sexually assault a girl in his dressing room, just minutes after the girl attended the recording of one of his shows. At the time, she believed the girl was just 14 years old. It seems almost unthinkable that one of the biggest stars of children's TV could be preying on the very kids who appeared on his BBC programmes. But tales of Savile's behaviour towards young girls had their roots back in his early career. Back in the 50s, Savile started off running dance halls in the north of England. In 1958, he was spotted by Radio Luxembourg and signed up as its star DJ. Then in 1964, his larger-than-life personality was unleashed on the nation when he was asked to present the first edition of the new BBC programme, Top of the Pops.
Welcome to January the 1st, 1964. It's 6:34 p.m. and it's a programme that you've never heard of before. It's called Top of the Pops, and there's the charts.
Around the same time, he was also asked to appear on a BBC radio talk show called Teen Scene. Its producer was Wilfred Diath.
Well, he had a reputation. I mean, he had a shocking reputation for young women, but I mean, it was all hearsay. I didn't know whether to believe it or not. As I shall repeatedly say, he never attempted to hide this predilection. So it was generally known that he was into young girls.
Days before the recording, Wilfred says Savile, then in his late 30s, asked to meet him in a Chinese restaurant in central London. But when Wilfred turned up, he says Savile wasn't alone.
I turned up at the Lotus House, I think it was on a Friday evening, and there he was sitting on a banquette with this very young girl. I would guess she was 12 if you'd asked me to guess. It could be that she was 13, 14, but I would have said 12. I asked him where he'd found her. I said that to him, where did you pick her up? And he said, Top of the Pops. I think it was the previous night. Top of the Pops went out on a Thursday night. And I said, I remember saying, is that your happy hunting ground? And he said, yes. And that was the extent of my conversation about the girl, because I found it rather demeaning to be having to talk to him in front of a little girl like that. And then we made an arrangement that I would ring him next morning at the Mascot Hotel. And next morning I rang him and he was obviously in bed with this young girl. In fact, he said he was in bed with her. And he asked me to talk to her, and I had to rather demean myself by saying hello. And she said, hello, Mr. Producer. And that was, I refused to have any more. I didn't want to talk to her again. I talked to him. We discussed that he would come in on a Sunday night for the live transmission, and that was the extent of it.
What made you think she was 12?
Well, I've had two daughters, so I'm fairly, I know about little girls. I've absolutely no doubt in my mind that she was between 12 and 14. I'd have gone to the lower end of that.
Did you tell anybody else about this?
Everybody knew that he was constantly in the company of underage girls. So it wasn't really very remarkable. It was just that I had evidence of it for the first time. Having heard a lot of gossip, I saw with my own eyes how he was behaving.
After leaving the BBC, Wilfred had his own troubles, spending 2 months in jail for credit card fraud. But he has firm views about what he witnessed back then.
Now I feel more confident and more mature, and I would have undoubtedly reported him. But in those days I was extremely vulnerable myself. I was a very, very junior producer. I was rather overwhelmed by his celebrity. Now, the other thing I've got to say, I was actually rather frightened of him. I wasn't a very strong person. He was a beefy guy. He was brawny. He'd been a coal miner. He was a wrestler. If he'd found out that I was grasping him to the top in the BBC, I won't say he would have killed me, but he'd have knocked me out, there's no doubt about it. And I was a bit frightened of him.
Back in the 60s, Savile was constantly surrounded by young girls. Never more so than while he was running clubs in the north of England. Alan Leake was a reporter on the local newspaper in Manchester. He was also a regular at the city's Bellevue Top 10 Club, where he says stories circulated about Savile and teenage girls.
Girls of 20 plus were never ever of interest to him at all. It was always the teenage girls, and in those days you couldn't tell whether a girl was 15, 16, 17, and you never asked for a birth certificate in those days. It was the era of free love.
What was his pattern?
He'd normally offer to take them for a drive in his Rolls Royce or his E-Type, and he would go off with them half, 3/4 of an hour, and then just roll back at the Top 10 Club as if nothing had happened, and just carry on and do his show.
Alan says he made several visits to Savile's homes, once for a pre-arranged interview, but Savile was otherwise engaged.
We'd just been talking generally when a girl arrived, She was a teenage girl, I couldn't tell what age, but as soon as she arrived, Savile took her off into what I assume was his bedroom. He was only in there about 10 minutes when he came out on his own and proceeded, without any bashfulness or anything, to wash himself off in the sink, which I thought was quite an unusual thing to do. And then this girl came in, joined us for 10 minutes, and then I went off. I hadn't got a story, but it was very plain to me that he didn't want me there any longer, so I left.
The contrast between some accounts of Savile's private life and his public image is stark. He was earning himself a reputation as a charity fundraiser, and through TV coverage like this, he was becoming famous as a volunteer hospital porter at his local Leeds General Infirmary. In March 1972, he collected an OBE. But what the public didn't know was that during this time, at least 2 young women now say he had started a sexual relationship with them when they were still 15-year-old schoolgirls. 40 years later, both women have agreed to speak out on the condition we protect their identities. They have families who know nothing about their past relationships with Savile. Both women are wearing wigs. We've changed their names and disguised their voices.
I think people need to know that there was another side of him, and it was quite a dark side. He was a predator, really, a predator on young girls.
One day in 1969, Val says she was introduced to Savile through a friend during a visit to the BBC. She was 15, he was in his early 40s. She says she soon became one of a select group of teenagers whom he would regularly invite into his dressing rooms, often during recordings of Top of the Pops.
The first time something happened, he actually got me into it was like an alcove in the dressing room, and he pushed me back against the wall, and then it was a hand up the skirt and touching me.
And when he put his hand up the skirt, did he touch you intimately?
Yes, yeah.
And what did he say anything? Did anything happen when he did that?
Thinking about it, I don't think he ever did say anything. But whenever he did that, because he did it on various occasions in various places, and it was always very quick, a quick fumble, and he was very strong, and he would pin you up against somewhere, quick fumble, hand up the skirt, and that was it. So it would be, he would grab any opportunity to do it. So other times it would be in the corridor again. If there was an alcove, he'd just push you into the alcove, quick fumble, and then carry on as normal.
So the first time something happened to you in his dressing room, did he know how old you were?
The first question he ever asked me was how old I was. So he knew.
And you told him you were 15 years old?
Yeah.
Now, between the ages of 15 and 16, how many times would you say that he indecently assaulted you?
Gosh, dozens probably.
At the time, Savile would travel around the country in a caravan come motorhome.
All right, darlings.
This eccentric aspect of his lifestyle became well known through coverage such as his 1971 edition of BBC's nationwide programme. When in London, he would park the vehicle at King's Cross. Val says she was regularly invited to visit him there. 40 years on, she claims memories of losing her virginity to him there are filled with pain.
When I was 16, he then, again, one of these fumbles then turned into sex, full sex, which I didn't realise that's what was happening. It sounds really stupid, I didn't realise. Again, naive girl, and he promised me he wasn't going all the way, but he did. And there was no foreplay, no romance, no taking off clothes, so it was, I'm sure it's why he always wore his shell suits, because he could just whip his elastic shell suit bottoms down very quickly. And that's what it was. It was just a quick act of sex. There was nothing else you'd call it, really.
So you were 16, you were in the back of this caravan, he was touching you. there comes a point where you say to him, you're not going the whole way. What was his response to that?
He just said, no, of course not, no, and carried on.
And what did you think?
I don't remember. I remember it being a struggle with me trying to push him off and him again pinning me down with his body weight, and then the deed was over.
And he's using quite a bit of force on you at this stage, and you're saying no. If you had to sum that up, would you sum it up in any way?
As a mature woman now, I look back and I think I was actually raped on that first occasion, because I definitely didn't know we were going to have full sex, and I definitely said to him, you're not going to go all the way. So looking back, I think, oh my God, he actually raped me. I was very young and he was in his 40s. And I think he was always a very charismatic man and quite a powerful personality. And I think as young girls we got caught up in that whole experience at the time, sort of almost living the life with a celebrity, because, if you're with him you had access to places and you met famous people, and he was a very charismatic person to be around. That just sort of went along with it, really. I never thought, it was only when I was much older I looked back and got more distressed by it as I've got older.
Around this period, Angie was part of the same group that used to hang around Savile, and says she too was having a sexual relationship with him. Today, she's a woman in her 50s. In 1968, when she says she met Savile, she was a naive 15-year-old girl. Angie says this is her with Savile during their first meeting outside the offices of Radio Luxembourg. Her image has been disguised to protect her identity. Just weeks later, according to Angie, she lost her virginity to the man more than 25 years her senior.
It was in a London hotel. He invited me to come round. When I got there, it was a bit of chit-chat first of all. Before I knew it, he had me on the bed and he was having sex with me.
So you were 15 years old?
I was.
And he was having full sexual intercourse with you?
Correct.
Did he kiss you? Did he touch you anywhere else?
No, Jim didn't do kissing. He didn't do emotion or foreplay or anything. It was just basically what he wanted, in and out, and that was it. And afterwards it was as though nothing had happened.
And did he wear a condom?
No, never.
So there was no preparation to it?
No.
Were you aware that he was going to have sex with you?
No, it was a complete shock to me. I was very naive. I had no idea what was happening, and in the light of day, he was a middle-aged man. He was in his early 40s. Well, he shouldn't be doing that to 15-year-olds. And actually, I'm quite angry, and it's quite repulsive what he did to me and other girls.
But back in 1968, Angie says she was swept away by the glamour of knowing one of the hottest showbiz personalities in Britain, and together with other favoured teenagers, having access to the BBC and Top of the Pops. She says at just 15, she was having full sex with Savile in BBC dressing rooms.
It happened on a number of occasions. On those occasions, there was no one else in the dressing room except for him and I, and there was like a little sort of couch, and he would have me lie down on it and just do the sex act really, really quickly. Obviously before anyone else came into the dressing room, but it was very, very quick, very unemotional, and that was it. And that happened on a number of occasions, as well as the sort of pinning up on the wall and so on. But being a teenager, not understanding things, you do blame yourself, and there's just so many mixed emotions with this, but I've always been with full regret that it happened, and I wasn't able to do anything about it, and I didn't understand it either. I just feel that he just took huge advantages of me.
Angie says Savile was at times menacing and controlling. In 1974, he gave her his autobiography, writing inside, "No escape." and signing it, her keeper. Both Angie and Val say their sexual relationships with Savile stopped when they reached their early 20s. But the legacy of Savile, seen here in Angie's private photos, remains with them still. Both say they contracted a sexually transmitted disease from him. They say they were too scared to speak out before now because they were afraid of him while he was alive.
There was always an air of, I don't know what you'd call it, not exactly menace, but there was always that air that he had power and that he had contacts and you wouldn't want to mess with him. So I would never have come out openly about it before.
Val and Angie say they were first invited into Savile's dressing room at Top of the Pops in the late 60s. 10 years later, 14-year-old singer Colleen Nolan had her own unpleasant experience with Savile on the show. She revealed what happened in a 2003 BBC documentary.
I stood next to Jimmy Savile and I was 14 and he was all over me.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are more Nolans than meet the eye.
You know, it was a bit like, ooh, I don't think I like it.
This is a Nolan here, but she's not old enough to join.
But it's funny because then you know it's family. Because I could see my sisters glaring at him like, you touch her and we'll kill you. And they would have.
There is no suggestion Colleen was ever assaulted by Savile, but it is clear from the interview that she felt uncomfortable and that his behaviour towards her was inappropriate. At this stage of my investigation, I've met 3 witnesses who say they saw Savile with young girls. And I've met 2 women who say they were victims of sex assaults at the hands of Savile while still 15-year-old schoolgirls. But there was more to come. In 1973, Jimmy Savile was riding high. He had a new Saturday tea time show on BBC One, a programme called Clunk Click, named after Savile's road safety campaign. The programme would be a precursor to Jim Will Fix It. Today, Sarah is a middle-aged professional woman, but back in 1973, she says she was a 14-year-old schoolgirl. She's told me what happened when she wrote a letter to Savile, care of the Clunk Click programme. She's asked us to protect her identity because her family know nothing about what followed. We've changed her name and she's represented here by an actress.
I wrote to Jimmy Savile at the show to tell him about the choir I was in. A few weeks later, I got home one Saturday and Mum said Jimmy Savile had been on the phone. He'd got my letter and had called to chat to me. When Mum told him I wasn't in, he said he'd call back. He then called again while I was out, and finally he called a 3rd time and I spoke to him. The choir was going to perform at Stoke Mandeville and he said he would come and watch.
At the time, Savile was a volunteer porter at the hospital. He would go on to raise millions for its spinal injury centre. He's seen here with Prince Charles and Princess Diana at its opening. Sarah says that when her choir performed for some of the patients at Stoke Mandeville in 1973, Savile, true to his word, was in the audience.
After the concert, while everyone was getting on the coach to leave, I ran up to him to let him know I was the one who had sent him the letter about the choir. Before I knew what had happened, he'd stuck his tongue into my mouth. It didn't seem to bother him that other people could have seen what he was doing. I was just so shocked. I pulled away and dashed onto the coach. I couldn't believe what had happened. Looking back now as an adult, I realised he'd been grooming me by calling me at home and arranging to come and see me in the choir. So many people looked up to him, including me. Yet he was trying to take advantage of a 14-year-old child.
In public, Savile could do no wrong. His Clunk Click TV programme was proving a rating success. But away from the TV studios, I've been told he was using his celebrity status to gain access to teenage girls at a school in Surrey. The girls at Duncroft Approved School were deemed troubled and most were the subject of court orders. They lived and studied at the school and had to abide by strict rules during their stay there. Savile was invited to visit the school to help raise its profile, but soon his frequent visits became the talk of the common room. Charlotte says she was 14 when she first met Savile there in 1974. What was the banter that you used to hear?
Oh, that's Savile, he's a pervert, he does this, he does that. But it wasn't said in a tone where the girls were really angry, or it was like, so teenage banter, like what was happening, it was expected. It was, oh God, here it goes again, Jimmy Savile. So, I mean, the way they spoke about it sometimes, it was like, it was speaking about having a cup of tea.
One day Charlotte says she discovered what it was like to become a target of Savile's unwanted attention. She says she was part of a group of girls invited to join Savile in a caravan parked in the grounds of Duncroft.
We all went into this caravan and Jimmy Savile was there, and the teacher was saying to us, oh, he's going to do a recording and of all you girls, and he's going to play it on the radio.
Tell me about it.
I don't know if he beckoned me first, or I can't remember that, but I do remember that I sat on his lap, and then the next thing I felt this hand sort of go up my jumper and sort of on my breast like this. I jumped up, I was absolutely freaked out. I started swearing and, what do you think you're doing? And then I was just dragged out of the caravan by two of the staff. Dragged back by my two arms, I remember. My feet were like this, heels were really being dragged in the grass, and told them, filthy mouth I have, how can I make those terrible accusations? You know, Uncle Jimmy does nothing but good for the school, and he was just so wonderful, and me, you know, I need to retract what I've said, I need to apologise. I was taken upstairs to the isolation unit, left there for 2 or 3 days, and said that I could come back into the building when I refrained from saying such filthy things and detract the accusations. And you know, that was it. It was that when I came out, I just didn't say anything more because I hated it in the isolation unit. It was a padded cell and you were locked in this room and just left. So I didn't think anything more about it, but I never saw him again after that, ever.
During my investigation, I'd heard claims that in the 1960s Savile would prey on teenage girls at Manchester's Bellevue Top 10 Club and seduce them in his trademark Rolls Royce. I've discovered allegations that 10 years later he was using the same modus operandi at Duncroft. Fiona, then just 14, says she was among the girls invited by Savile to be taken for rides in his Rolls Royce.
So Jimmy Savile would turn up in his Rolls Royce. What would he do?
He would get out of his car, take a box of cigars from the boot, go to the headmistress's office, and then he would come into the common room. And he would almost sit down and try and be one of the girls, and he'd make his selection, if you like, when he got there. And it was quite a treat to be offered to be taken out by him, because we didn't get to go out that much. Occasionally we went in a minibus with rides with one of the members of staff, but it was very controlled and we were only allowed certain places and things. So to have this gentleman say he wanted to take 2 or 3 of you out with just him, it was freedom, it was wonderful.
Sophia, tell me where did that happen in the car? That happened around the Duncroft, the first time that something happened?
The very first time he abused me, we were in the car park and the other girls were sat at one of those like picnic tables, benches, together, and I was with him on my own in the back of the car. And I knew the moment he asked me to stay in the car with him what was expected of me, because I was having this wonderful day out and I was expected to pay for it. I now know it was wrong, and I can still get very angry over it, but nobody believed me then, so I don't expect people to believe me now, if I'm honest.
Can you tell me what he did?
At the time I wore a bra that was underwired, and by the time I'd finished spending some time with him, the wire from my bra had come up over the top of my breast. And he hadn't restrained himself just to my breast. He'd also had a good fumble around in my knickers, I could say, and it didn't make me feel comfortable or good about myself, but I thought it was expected of me.
And on that occasion, and you know, did he expect you to do anything to him? Did he want you? Did he expose himself? Did he get you to touch him in any way?
Yeah. I was expected to masturbate him. And it sounds very odd, and I'm still not sure why, but he wanted me to put my finger into his anus. And I don't understand why to this day, but that was what he wanted.
Fiona says she was assaulted on 2 further occasions during car rides with Savile. She also claims Savile went on to abuse her at BBC Television Centre. Savile would invite Duncroft girls to be among the audience who used to sit on beanbags on the set of Clunk Click, as this 1974 clip from the programme shows. It's claimed Savile used these invitations as an opportunity to groom girls.
Again, we knew what was expected of us. We had to pay.
Tell me what happened to you with him.
He had an alcove in his dressing room that had a curtain over it, and he would take you behind the curtain. He himself would just make quite lewd suggestions to you a lot of the time, and he often wanted you to sit on his knee while he spun round in the chair, but you could feel him getting an erection as you were sitting on his knee. I'm not quite sure how you describe it, as petting or whatever, but he got his usual hand job off me.
And on that occasion, in this alcove, did he touch you?
Yes. He always touched my breasts, but at the same time he'd be touching my breasts, he'd always have his hands down my knickers. There were no staff around in the room, just the girls in there and 1 or 2 other people, so I suppose the privacy we got was from the curtain in the alcove, but I have no doubt that he went and told everybody else what he did afterwards, and it didn't make me feel that good about myself. And I remember the first time as well, sitting watching the recording of the show, and it was almost as if I wasn't there. I wasn't watching it because I was thinking too much about what had happened and what I had to do the following day and getting there. And I just wasn't concentrating at all on watching this show. It was almost a bit as if I was sat there in a dream state or something.
Now then, I think...
Savile's Clunk Click programme attracted some of the biggest pop stars of the day.
Get yourselves there like that. Just put yourself in there.
I get 2.
You get 2.
Here he is with Gary Glitter.
I should be giving girls away lessons there, as I'm going to get some down here.
The programme gave girls the opportunity to meet some of their idols.
Right. All we can say now...
Fiona says during a later visit to a recording of the show, she too met Glitter.
Good night. See you next week for another Clunk Click. Ahoy!
Fiona doesn't make any abuse allegations against Glitter, real name Paul Gadd. In 1999, Gadd was jailed for 4 months for possessing images of child abuse. He went on to spend over 2 years in a Vietnam jail for abusing 2 girls. But 10 years later, it seems that Savile believed Gadd was more victim than predator. I've obtained a recording of an interview Savile carried out with a journalist in which he appears to defend the convicted paedophile.
Now Gary, all he did was to take his computer into the PC world to get it repaired. And they went into the hard drive, saw all these dodgy pictures, and told the police. And the police then, oh, we've got a famous person. Oh my goodness, yeah, we'll have them. But Gary had not sold them, not tried to sell them, not tried to show them in public or anything like that. It would for his own gratification, whether it was right or wrong. Is of course it's up to him as a person. But they didn't do anything wrong, but they are then demonised. And of course, if you ever said to a couple, what's Gary Glitter doing wrong, say, well, nothing really. They just sat at home watching these dodgy films.
Well, he did go to sort of Southeast Asia after that.
Oh, he did, and now you're telling me that somebody didn't stick to a little person. You know, Shesh Silafan, he was like that, but he wasn't public with it, and he didn't do anything.
Savile's thoughts on glitter were recorded 2 years before his death. I believe the recording is further evidence of Savile's warped attitude to sexual abuse. My investigation has now uncovered 5 women who say they were victims of abuse at the hands of Jimmy Savile. But were he still alive, would their evidence be enough to lead to his arrest? In 2007, Savile was the subject of a Surrey police investigation. This followed a complaint from a woman who said she'd been sexually assaulted by him in the 1970s while a pupil at Duncroft. The woman has not taken part in this programme. A Surrey Force spokesman told us,
"The allegation was investigated and an individual was interviewed under caution. There was insufficient evidence to take any further action."
But at the end of my investigation, just how strong is the evidence I've gathered against Savile? I want to get the opinion of one of Britain's leading lawyers. Ian Glenn QC works both as a prosecutor and a defence barrister. He has both prosecuted and defended cases of historic child sex abuse. I have shown him the full transcripts of all the people who have been interviewed as part of this programme.
Ian, what are your thoughts on the evidence that we've presented to you?
It has to be emphasised, obviously, that Jimmy Savile's side of this has not been heard and can never be heard. And so one can only look at the material from the complainants, which I've done. If there was a single incident which was 30 or 40 years old, it would be unfair, in my opinion, to put him on trial for it, because he wouldn't be able to remember what had happened on a single occasion. But the evidence amounts to much more than that. It's a pattern of offending that these complainants are speaking about. There's independence between 2 or 3 groups of complainants, and they are backed up to some extent by independent witnesses who observed relevant occasions of misconduct.
Do you think we've gathered enough evidence for Jimmy Savile to be arrested were he still alive?
To be arrested, there'd have to be reasonable grounds for suspicion, and the witness statements that I read would amount to reasonable grounds for his arrest.
But as the anniversary of Savile's death approaches, what about those women I have spoken to? I have one last person to visit. Esther Ransom launched the child protection charity Childline 26 years ago. And for many years she, like Savile, was one of the BBC's biggest stars. She was one of the first to be asked to comment about him following his death.
He was exactly off-screen as he appeared on-screen. Eccentric, idiosyncratic, he was a one-off, he was his own invention, with the cigar, with shiny shell suits.
Esther has agreed to watch some of the interviews gathered as part of my investigation.
As I opened the door, he turned his head, and it was just his tongue that was just sort of coming out of her mouth. I felt this hand sort of go up my jumper and sort of on my breast like this.
He hadn't restrained himself just to my breast. He'd also had a good fumble around in my knickers.
So Esther, you've just seen some very powerful interviews.
Absolutely.
Tell me what your feelings are.
Very painful, very distressing, because in a funny way, we all colluded with this, didn't we? We made him into the Jimmy Savile, who was untouchable, who was nobody could criticize. Jim will fix it. For children, he was a sort of godlike figure. Everybody knew of the good that Jimmy did and what he did for children, and these children were powerless.
Esther, you've got a lot of experience of hearing children who give accounts. Do you doubt their accounts?
No. Before I watched these, I had absolutely decided that I would not make up my mind, because he's not here to defend himself. It seems utterly unfair. But I must say that what these women say is so matter of fact. They corroborate each other. The style of the abuse and the attack on them was absolutely consistent one with each other. And I'm afraid the jury isn't out anymore. We all blocked our ears to the gossip. There was gossip, there were rumours. And I think the important message, I think, in your programme is that the children they just mustn't blame themselves. We say over and over again on the phone at Childline, it's always the adult to blame. It's never the child. This is not the child's fault. But what I know about child abuse is it comes off on the child, and the child takes the guilt, the child takes the responsibility. And I say to these women, don't be angry with yourselves. It's the adult to blame. And it's the adult world that created this mythical figure who was above criticism, who was above blame. And of course he wasn't. And I feel that we, in television, in his world, in some way colluded with him as a child abuser, because I now believe that's what he was.
We put the allegations made regarding Savile's behaviour at the BBC to the corporation. 2 weeks ago, the BBC told us that after extensive searches of its files, no record of allegations or misconduct could be found, and so it was not possible for the corporation to take any further action. Yesterday, they issued a new statement.
We are horrified by allegations that anything of this sort could have happened at the BBC or have been carried out by anyone working for the BBC. They are allegations of a serious criminal nature, which the police have the power to investigate. We have asked the BBC Investigations Unit to make direct contact with all the police forces in receipt of allegations and offer to help them investigate these matters and provide full support to any lines of inquiry they wish to pursue.
Mind, who as the National Association for Mental Health were involved in the management of Duncroft at the time, told us they were shocked and saddened by the allegations of abuse there and are investigating them. Last week, the Jimmy Savile Charitable Trust told us it is saddened by the broadcast of such serious allegations, which by their very nature will be one-sided and may impact on the charitable trust and its endeavours. Today the trust said, at no time did the trustees see Jimmy behaving in an inappropriate sexual manner with anyone, but they feel that these serious allegations should be properly investigated with full and complete evidence being obtained from all possible sources. I've carefully gathered the evidence against Savile, as I would have were I still a serving police officer. Of course, now that Savile's dead, he will never be able to answer the allegations against him. But when he was alive, a number of people were too afraid to speak out. Since this programme has become public knowledge, a number of other women have approached us with similar claims.
If you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this programme, you can contact the National Association for People Abused in Childhood. Their helpline number is 0800 085 3330.
And you can also contact the NSPCC helpline if you've been affected by the issues raised in this programme. They are on 0808 800 5000, or you can contact your local police force.